This must be bringing back memories of your time in government. Do you have some empathy for Yvette Cooper here after this ruling? What is she supposed to do with asylum seekers, 30,000-ish, in hotels if suddenly they're going to start to be shut down?
I'm afraid I have no sympathy whatsoever for the position that ministers find themselves in, because this is the direct consequence of the choices that they had made. Undoubtedly, our time in Parliament, we hadn't solved this issue in the way that we wanted to. We hadn't got to that concluding point of putting a final stop to these channel crossings. But what was beginning to happen was we were beginning to see numbers drop off. We were beginning to get on a motor in terms of closing hotels. James Cleverly and I, Robert Jenrick prior to that, closed 188 of these hotels. And we'd got a meaningful deterrent that was stopping people making those crossings. On day one, they ripped up the Rwanda deterrent. They cancelled some of the cheaper, more basic level accommodation that we had put in place, for example, at RAF Scampton. Not an ideal situation, but it was better than having people in hotels. And, for example, the Bibby Stockholm. Those choices have now come home to roost. And I think that this must be a wake-up call for ministers, that they have to do something markedly different and put aside political dogma that's driven their decisions to date.
Yeah, well, they did scrap the Rwanda plan, but it never got off the ground, did it? Many critics of the Conservative government say that, well, you put forward these ambitious plans, didn't change law, didn't change ECHR. There was a delay to that, of course. Now, this morning, Richard Tice has said that all 10 reform councils will be instructed to launch legal action against asylum hotels in their area. Do you want all Conservative-led councils to do the same?
I think that it's inevitable that those reform councils will come forward with these challenges, because this case has rested on this very specific point about change of use. Now, I would imagine that that is pertinent in the case of a lot of these hotels. It would undoubtedly drive a coach and horses through the asylum accommodation situation. I actually think that we get so bogged down in some of the consequences of what happens, and understandably, because it's very visual for voters and very, pertinent to how people feel in their communities. But what we've actually got to focus on here is putting a stop to the flow of people coming, because all the while that you don't do that, you're going to continue to have this problem. You're going to continue to have the need for accommodation. And that's why, you mentioned about the fact that we didn't deliver on the Rwanda policy in the end. We didn't send a flight. That is a huge source of regret that I have. I wouldn't have had the election when we had the election. I'd have gone on and operationalised those flights. I think what we've actually got to do, and that politicians on all sides of the debate really need to get behind now, is doing whatever is necessary with our laws to make sure that we can send people to a third country, because that is the only way you're going to stop this. The French aren't interested in taking all of these people back. That is much more complicated than it is to send people to somewhere like Rwanda.
I think many people would agree with that, and of course nobody wants these hotels in their community, but neither do we necessarily want these men in in houses of multiple occupation, also in those communities. But just coming back to the hotel policy, I mean, this has been incredibly lucrative for the hotel chains who are now providing asylum seeker accommodation. And the three major chains that provide the hotels have made profits of £383 million since 2019. Why did the Home Office initially sign those contracts with such enormous amounts of taxpayer money?
So my understanding of it was that the contracts that are the genesis of the situation that we see today never envisaged the scale of problem that we now are faced with. And that has only got more difficult in recent months, as I say, because of the reasons and the choices that government has made since they were elected in July last year. But back in 2018, 2019, when those contracts were at their inception, the scale of the problem was minuscule in comparison to, where we are today. It did get much worse. But that was why I think you've got to be willing politically to do whatever is necessary to move this situation on. And all the while that people think they can get in a small boat, get to the United Kingdom and be able to stay here, they're going to keep coming.
On the topic of, very quickly, on doing whatever is necessary, your colleague Swella Braverman said last week that, I know you're focusing on getting people deported, but those who are already here, she said, tented accommodation in camps has got to be the way. Do you agree with her?
I actually think, given where we are now, the Home Office may well have to look at those sorts of options, because it may well be that a good number of these hotels are no longer operable, because if applications are made and cases are granted, that's going to be a huge challenge. But they do need to do something very quickly to shift the dial fundamentally. The status quo is a disaster.